Welcome this evening, and thank you for joining us. My name is Audrey Lichter, the Executive Director of Chai Mitzvah, the Resource Center for Jewish Engagement. Today's Scholars Circle topic is Perspectives on the Gaza War, Politics, Security, and Society in Israel with Dr. Saltzman. Chai Mitzvah is a national organization now celebrating its 17th year. We are the sponsors of Scholars Circle, a Jewish resource center that focuses on building community through Jewish engagement programs. We have over 20 curricula tailored for small group conversation for teens and adults, lay or professionally led. For more information, please visit our website at chaimitzvah.org. The curriculum was also taught in the Scholars Circle's program was inspired by Scott Shea, our founder and board president, who authored the best-selling book Conspiracy U, A Case Study, which unpacks anti-Zionist conspiracy theories from the left and the right political spectrum. The curriculum was also taught and recorded in a series by Dr. Andrew Pessin. The Scholars Circle program hosts lectures by prominent scholars every 2 weeks on topics relating to Israel and the Jewish community, geared towards rabbis, educators, and lay leaders who are charged with explaining the complex issues facing the Jewish community. To that end, each lecture will have a resource guide that will be sent to you after the lecture. A recording of each lecture will be accessible on our website and shared with you through email. We are excited to continue the Scholars Circle program and need your support to keep it thriving. Scholars Circle has engaged now over 4,000 participants since 10/7. Your donation will enable us to continue bringing international scholars to you at no charge to share their expertise on the evolving Jewish world in the aftermath of October 7th. Thank you to all who have contributed. To make a donation, please visit chaimitzvah.org and click on the gold menu tab Scholars Circle and select Support Scholars Circle. This will be included in our follow-up email as well. Thank you for considering supporting us in this engaging program. The program's recording will be sent to you via email in a few days and will also be available on our website at chaimitzvah.org. Dr. Saltzman is an associate research professor of Israeli Studies and the director of the Gildenhorn Institute for Israeli Studies at the University of Maryland, College Park. His scholarship and teaching focuses on international security, Israel foreign and security policy, U.S. foreign policy, and political psychology. Dr. Saltzman is the author of Securitizing Balance of Power Theory, a polymorphic reconceptualization. He has also written numerous scholarly articles and book chapters, as well as commentaries in Los Angeles Times, Haaretz, the Jerusalem Post, and other prominent outlets. Dr. Saltzman earned his PhD in International Relations in 2010 from the University of Haifa and was a postdoctoral research fellow at the International Security Program, Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs, John F. Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University. We welcome your questions at any time, and please use the Zoom Q&A box. Dr. Saltzman, welcome to Scholars Circle.
Thank you so much, Audrey, for having me again. It is wonderful to be here. I'm just going to share my screen. Alrighty. Yes. As I told the organizers a couple of minutes ago, in a way, I kind of set myself for a failure because this is a very broad topic. There's so many ways to address it, and I'll try to do my best in the next 30 minutes or so in doing a good job, offering some insight, something valuable that you can take with you. But as always, I'm just as, if not more so, interested in the conversation afterwards. So the Q&A part, in my view, is an essential, a vital part of this conversation, so we can have kind of a dialogue rather than just me talking for 30 minutes. So thank you again for having me. It is Rosh Hashanah, and I just, it's en route to Yom Kippur, so I just wanted to offer my greetings for the holidays for those who are observing. I found this photo or this image on the right on Twitter. A friend of mine tweeted it, and it says, Shana Tova, may you be as strong as this stool and as optimistic as this dog, which in a way kind of encapsulates and captures something about Israelis during these times, a sense of hope for being strong, resilient, but at the same time, trying to be brave oftentimes when it's very difficult. So this is my contribution to this, the season of Jewish high holidays. So Shana Tova, Gmar Chatima Tova. Alrighty, let's get to business, so to speak. I didn't want to use any graphic or overly graphic photos from that day, but I did just want to kind of emphasize that this was not another expression of or another manifestation of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It is something that goes above and beyond anything that both Israelis and certainly Palestinians have seen since 1948. From the Jewish perspective, from the Israeli perspective, the killing of more than 1,200 people, the 250 people who were taken hostage, civilians, some Holocaust survivors. This kind of is a real watershed event, my apologies, from Israeli history. It is unprecedented in the scope, the nature, the heinous nature of this attack. And obviously, it has massive impact on Israeli society, politics, national security, and so on and so forth. One of the main takeaways, as I was asked earlier by the organizers, is that some of the things we know already, how they kind of impacted the way Israelis behave or think, but some of it will take time until the kind of the fog of war vanishes and Israelis can reflect. They're still in the stage of if it's PTSD, then there's no P. They're still in the TSD. They're still in the trauma to this very day, I would argue, for the most part. Alrighty, so let's try to break it down piece by piece. Let's start with Israeli politics. I'm going to kind of briefly provide a background, a couple of comments, and then talk about what changed since October 7th. This is the government as it was sworn into office in early 2023, in January 2023. It has not changed dramatically. There were some shuffles within the government. One minister resigned, the other one was replaced by another, but for the most part, it remained quite the same. And this is the message from a political perspective. The government is sitting on very solid grounds. It has now 68 votes, 68 seats in the Israeli parliament out of 120. It was able to snatch one party from the opposition. And so for the most part, the Israeli political system is resilient and strong. However, it comes on the heels of a very chronic political process of instability. Between 2019 and 2022, Israel went to the polls 5 times. This is unprecedented. It was leaders or politicians, leaders of parties were unable to form a coalition government. And as a result of that, the Netanyahu government, for the most part, remained as in transition or a intermediate government, a temporary government. In early 2023, after sworn into office, the government's one of the first things it done was to announce a judicial reform or overhaul. The argument, the ideological argument, the political argument was that the balance between the 3 branches of government was broken, was offset, and it needs to be reinstated. This led to a massive wave of protests on the streets every Saturday night. It was extremely controversial. You had a very polarized political setting, a very polarized Israeli society at the time. The Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, was warned multiple times by leaders of the opposition, as well as senior military leaders and heads of the Shin Bet, the Israeli security services, that this overhaul or reform makes Israel weaker and perceived as vulnerable by others around it. And then October 7th happens. What does it do to the coalition government? What does it do to the coalition politics in Israel? First of all, since October 7th, polls consistently show that the Israeli public, by and large, is dissatisfied with the current government. They say it's incompetent in the way that it dealt with October 7th, the way that it led to October 7th. It is corrupt. The prime minister is facing multiple indictments for corruption and so on and so forth. And people argue that it is extremely radical. At the time, Joe Biden said that this is the most right-wing radical government ever since Golda Meir. So this is one element. On the other hand, the government was able to remain in office, to remain in power, because nobody wanted to stay in the opposition. The members of this coalition, the members of this cabinet, felt that this is a quote from a Zambian politician that I like. It says, in the opposition, it is cold. You have no access to resources, whatever these are. And so from the political perspective, the government was benefiting or exploiting the lack of options for its government partners. And for example, Benjamin Netanyahu was, as I said, was indicted, so he feels that staying in power prevents him from going to jail, if convicted, of course. Haredi or ultra-Orthodox Jewish parties believe that this is the only way to exempt Haredi men from serving in the military. We'll get to that in a few minutes. The settler parties, whether that is Itamar Ben-Gvir or Bezalel Smotrich, believe that this is the only way to maintain Israeli control over the West Bank, prevent the creation of a Palestinian state, increase the number of settlements, and so on and so forth. So nobody had an interest to collapse or to bring an end to this government. In addition, the opposition was pretty dysfunctional or not very impressive. In fact, a week or a couple of days after the attack on October 11th, one of the main leaders of the opposition actually joined the government to support it from within. Benny Gantz was called by the prime minister, and Benny Gantz, being the kind of the character that he is, the personality that he is, a former chief of staff, caring about the state of Israel, said that, I joined the government to make sure that it makes the right decisions, given what I've seen about the Netanyahu response to these attacks. But ever since, the opposition seems always kind of lagging behind the Israeli street, those who actually oppose the government and opposed it since January 2023, when the overall or the reform, judicial reform, was announced. It's perceived as not doing enough, not being vigilant enough, not being aggressive enough. There's another element. There's a lot of conversations now in Israel about the future of free elections in Israel. The elections are set for October 2026. I'll talk about that in a moment. But there's a lot of concerns about whether the current government, the current prime minister, may employ all kinds of tricks to prevent it from happening or restricting it, especially when it comes to Arab votes. So they will find ways to prevent certain parties from running, certain politicians from participating, and so on and so forth. So this is one element that is very, very interesting in the post-October 7th. Can there be some semblance of fixing or playing around with the elections or with the rules of the elections or not? In addition, the overall or the reform that was announced in January 23 and was paused reemerged last year. The status of other gatekeepers is extensively, repeatedly, continuously challenged by this government. The Attorney General was fired by the government. The firing was prevented by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, in and of itself, is under scrutiny by the government. The Minister of Justice, Yariv Levin, who announced the overhaul, refuses to acknowledge the election of Aryeh Amit to be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, says the process was off. He wasn't participating in the meeting, hence it's invalid, and he does not recognize his position as the Chief Justice. And just today, a particular committee approved the appointment of David Zini, a former Israeli general who was nominated by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to serve as the next head of the Shin Bet after the previous one resigned. This particular officer went behind the back, allegedly, of the chief of staff and spoke with Netanyahu without prior approval, has very strong right-wing, radical right-wing, according to some reporting, views, and people are quite scared about that. What does that mean? Certainly in the context of free elections, certainly in terms of Israeli democracy, how resilient it is or not. Has October 7th changed the conversation, the public sphere, in terms of the actual issues? Is it peace? Is it still peace versus security? How do you define each? What comes first? What generates or creates the other? Benjamin Netanyahu gave a very controversial speech a couple of weeks ago talking about Israeli isolation and the fact that Israel will become a super Sparta, giving all kinds of boycotts, international boycotts. But at the same time, there's an effort, at least theoretically, to try and be more regionally and certainly globally integrated into the economy, the international community by and large. So these are kind of very ideal type kind of conversations or debates that are taking place. One major debate, political debate, is about the annexation of the West Bank. Trump earlier today came out and says, I'm not going to allow Benjamin Netanyahu or Israel to annex the West Bank. This is out of the question. But it is a political issue because Benjamin Netanyahu, to please his coalition partners, is talking about annexing the West Bank, certainly in response to the international recognition of a Palestinian state by countries such as Canada, France, the UK, Australia, and so on and so forth. So politics is intermingled with strategic issues, with domestic affairs, and so on and so forth. I would argue that post-October 7th, still Netanyahu is the most important actor on the scene. He's a very divisive and a very decisive factor, determining pretty much where the Israeli political scene or the conversation or the dialogue goes into. His right-wing base idolizes him, loves him. There's nobody else as far as they're concerned. He has done nothing wrong. It was the IDF that failed on October 7th. It is the Shin Bet, the security and intelligence services, but it's not him. He's not responsible. He's not guilty. The rest, on the other hand, see him as the primary culprit. They don't trust him. They don't trust his ability to lead. Don't trust his decision-making process. They do not approve of his calculus. They say it's highly politicized. There are no alternative leaders for the most part. Benny Gantz, as I said, was a member of Benjamin Netanyahu's government for a whole year between October 11th and June 2024. Yair Lapid is not doing enough, according to most people who are when surveyed. So their gravitas, their ability to challenge, to compete, to present an alternative vision is quite limited. Naftali Bennett, who was the prime minister for a very short period of time between 2021 and 2022, is trying to revive this idea of a change government, but excluding the Arabs now. He's showing indications or showing signs that he's thinking about running again. He's making speeches, giving talks, organizing parties, talking about politicians, and so on and so forth. So the bottom line from a political perspective, that despite everything that we've seen in the past couple of years, the elections will take place in 2026, unless, and I can think about at least three scenarios, although as you can see in the bottom, what are the chances for an earlier election? Very slim to non-existent. Benjamin Netanyahu holds the key to these elections this time around, and whether he wants it, it will happen earlier or not, it will take place in 2026. One of the things that he tried to do, for example, after the attack of Iran in June this year, was to check the polls, and there was no movement. He didn't see a kind of a spike in his approval rating. But if he does feel that something will be worth it for him in terms of increasing the number of seats that his party wins in the elections, for example, normalizing the relationship with Saudi Arabia or Syria, then certainly he may go and run or reschedule the elections and call for early elections. Another option is that his partners decide to dissolve the government, to collapse the government. If he makes the decision to end the war, not to annex the West Bank, if he goes ahead with Haredi military conscription, I'll talk about that in a moment. But nevertheless, there's another option. As I said, he's been indicted for a variety of corruption clauses now, and whether he's perhaps, most unlikely, convicted perhaps, then perhaps he'll rethink that position, but I don't see that happening. There's a number of affairs he's involved with, bribes, fraud. There's a submarine affair that he authorized the sales from Germany to Egypt. there's Qatargate, there's the Bild, the German newspaper. What are the chances? As I said, slim to no existence. So barring something dramatic, elections will take place in October 2026 as originally scheduled. What about Israeli national security? Well, just a couple of words of background. Benjamin Netanyahu was advocating or implementing this theory, or if you like, this conception of conflict management. You don't have to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. All you need to do is to manage it, keep it under the lid, so to speak. And as a result, you can pay off Hamas in Gaza, keep them content as long as they're in power, they get funded, you weaken the Palestinian Authority, so there's no connection between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So there's no chance for a Palestinian state to emerge, certainly not a viable one. From his perspective, and most of the defense establishment, as a result of this conception, as it's referred to in Israel, the focus was Iran, Iran's nuclear program as an existential threat, and everything else was of less importance, secondary. It was always kind of a subsidiary, if you like, a proxy of Iran, but not the essence of this existential threat that was Iran's ability or perhaps race to build a nuclear bomb. So what are the kind of some of the key impacts of October 7th on Israeli national security? Then my answer is, or my comment is, that it's a very nuanced, very complicated and diverse story. It's a story of many and different fronts. Gaza, as we've seen, has turned from a kind of a war zone to a limited incursion over the couple of years, to insurgency and counterinsurgency today. You have a complete reluctance of the IDF to take over Gaza City now. When the chief of staff went to the cabinet meeting, he said, this is not a viable military option. We shouldn't do it. It will cost us dearly in blood and treasure, international legitimacy, and so on and so forth. And Benjamin Netanyahu and the cabinet imposed their will. And unfortunately for the chief of staff, he had no other choice but to follow the political dictates, if you like, of the government. In the civil-military relationship, the civilian strata is always the superior one in a democracy. So he's doing that quite reluctantly. If you follow the news, they are edging towards Gaza City very slowly, very carefully, I would argue anticipating or hoping that Trump will facilitate something in between. If you follow the news, once again, there was a meeting with senior Arab and Muslim leaders just a couple of days ago, and Trump says that there's a deal on the table, 21 points. It seems like if this will gain some traction, that the chief of staff will not be required to give the order to invade Gaza City itself. Lebanon, on the other hand, is a major success from the Israeli perspective. They were able to decapitate Hezbollah's leadership, Hassan Nasrallah, and his heirs multiple times. You've all heard about the pager operation. It was on 60 Minutes here in the United States. It was a brilliant operation. And so there's a new sheriff in town in Beirut. There's a new president, a new prime minister, and they're working closely with the United States to try and demilitarize Hezbollah and neutralize its ability to take over the decision-making process in Beirut, in Lebanon itself. So this is a major success. There's still some presence of Israeli military forces there. It's not over, but it seems like there's a path moving forward where the Lebanese government now, as opposed to any other government in the past, is willing not only to engage Israel or to comply with some of these demands, but actually for its own self-preservation to try and get rid of Hezbollah, which is a major success if accomplished. Syria is another very interesting place. Israel has been holding on to a couple of strategic spots there. The Hermon mountain, for example, the highest mountain in Israel. There's an Israeli side, there's a Syrian side. The Israelis are now controlling both sides in other strategic locations in the Golan, beyond the Golan Heights into Syrian territory. There's a potential for a major breakthrough there. Ahmed al-Shara, the Syrian leader, is perceived by many in the region, and some in Israel as well, as the new Anwar al-Sadat, the president of Egypt that came in the mid-1970s after the Yom Kippur 1973 war, and kind of said, this is the time to make peace. Ahmed al-Shara himself, in his speech in the UN General Assembly says that Israel has nothing to fear from as far as Syria is concerned. Quite the opposite, he said. Syria is afraid of Israel. And so if Israel complies with international law, pursues peaceful relations, then there's a chance of some form of perhaps not normalization at first, but certainly kind of a return to the ceasefire agreement of 1974. And indeed, the Israeli National Security Advisor, as well as Ron Dermer, the Minister of Strategic Affairs, have met their counterparts, their Syrian counterparts, multiple times in several European capitals. In other words, there's face-to-face interaction with Syrian senior officials, something that has not happened since the late 1990s, early 2000s. So this is a major breakthrough, a major success as far as Israel is concerned. And this is a function of the success that Israel had in Lebanon. By decapitating Hezbollah, it allowed Ashara and the forces that he has led to take over Damascus, to eject Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria, who ran away, who fled to Moscow, and open a new page, so to speak. There is an issue with the Druze who were attacked by certain elements within Ashara's coalition, but it seems like this is being taken care of, or at least the Americans are enforcing a more benevolent approach to different ethnic and religious groups within Syria. And last but not least, the confrontation between Iran and Israel has taken many shapes. It had moved from proxy wars, mostly through Hezbollah and other factions in Syria, or assassinations of nuclear scientists in Tehran, to complete direct military confrontation that culminated in the 12-day war in June of this year, where Israel attacked Iran's nuclear sites. The United States intervened as well with bunker buster bombs, stealth bombers. But nevertheless, there's a revival, according to reports that came out yesterday and today, of the nuclear program of Iran. They're trying to rebuild some of the sites. They have some issues with mixers or whatever, but it is there. But nevertheless, this was a major success from the Israeli perspective, as Israelis see it, the defense establishment, the security establishment, if you wish. It reestablished the deterrence, although Israel was hit, but certainly Iran was extremely vulnerable. There were no aerial defense systems in place. Israel basically controlled airspace, did whatever it wanted. That was a major breakthrough, a major success from the Israeli perspective. Yemen is a failure. Yesterday, a Houthi drone hit a shopping mall in Eilat, the southern city of Eilat, the southern port city of Eilat. The United States basically abandoned Israel after they tried to attack and decimate the Houthis. At one point in time, President Trump had negotiated a deal with the Houthis that they will not attack American ships, and they basically left Israel alone. This is still an Israeli operational failure, despite the fact that they were able to attack a cabinet meeting, a government meeting of the Houthi leadership at the time, but it was unable to fully take them out, so to speak. Case in point is the drone attack in Ilai, and earlier today, there was another missile fired, ballistic missile fired from Yemen towards Israel that was intercepted. But in the case of Eilat, the port of Eilat is completely closed. It's shut down. There's no ships going from East Asia through the Gulf all the way to Eilat. It is completely shut down. That undermines Israel's naval independence or maritime independence. And the attack yesterday still shows that Israel is vulnerable to a large extent. The Israeli defense establishment, the security establishment, has been involved in trying to restore the pillars of Israeli national security, these classical three components that were identified by David Ben-Gurion at the time: deterrence, early warning, and decisive victory. And again, you can see that this is a mixed bag of tricks, so to speak, and it depends on the front where you are. In 2007, the Meridor Committee added defense as well, something that was shattered during the attack of October 7th. Hamas was not deterred. Early warning was non-existent. They didn't know about the plan, although they had some indications about its existence. And certainly there's no decisive victory in Gaza to this very day. In defense, while still there are no rockets fired at Israel, every now and then there is one fired from the Gaza Strip towards the Gaza envelope, but it's still not clear to what extent is Israel able to erect something that is formidable, that will prevent that otherwise. And I'll end this section by kind of mentioning kind of the grandmaster of military strategy, Karl von Clausewitz, who said that war is a mere continuation of policy with other means. And this is something that the Israeli chief of staff was talking about. There's a limit to what military power can achieve. And in this regard, the political, diplomatic solution, the kind of the off-ramp, if you wish, is something that the Israeli government, according to the chief of staff himself, has not been exhausting, has not been exploring sufficiently. So while there are some successes, there's a major failure in Gaza, the argument is that you can resolve that still with some diplomatic creativity, if you wish. What happened to Israeli society since October 2023? My apologies. Well, obviously, this is still something that Israelis are reckoning with. As I said, they're still in the trauma phase of the PTSD. They're not in the post-traumatic stress syndrome yet. And so it's not clear yet what are the long-term implications of the attack on Israeli society. But nevertheless, we can see some short-term or medium-term effects there nevertheless. There was massive, inspiring societal unity in the aftermath of the attack. NGOs, civil society, individuals, they all pitched in to help, to assist. Not only that individuals went to fight when the IDF was missing, non-existent, but they organized supply of food, medication, and so on and so forth. Places to live, people were evacuated, and so on and so forth. But quite quickly, there was a return to normalcy, if you like. The polarization of January through October 2023, the judicial overhaul, and even before that, kind of raised its head once again. So I would argue that October 7th didn't move the needle in that way or to that extent that went above and transcended above and beyond the polarization. And to some extent, this is the Israeli new way of life, if you like. It's the new normal. It is very, very difficult to have conversations across political, ethnic lines, and so on and so forth. Identity politics has reemerged. Again, it was never gone, but it kind of reemerged, but this time with, I would argue, on steroids to some extent. Right, left, despite the fact that it's not clear what is right and what is left today in the post-October 7th period. If you're pro-Palestinian state, does that mean you're left? Yes, but are there many Israelis who advocate for a Palestinian state? Not so much. So it's something else. Is it whether you're in favor of Benjamin Netanyahu or is it against? It's not clear. Even ethnic divides found their way in the post-October 7th discourse. Ashkenazi, Mizrahi, Sephardi. These conversations kind of led to tell me who you are, where your parents or grandparents came from, and I will tell you what political preferences or orientation you have. It became kind of very trivial in a sense. And certainly the secular religious divide has reemerged once again, especially as I will talk about in a second with regards to the ultra-Orthodox or Haredi Jewish men who do not serve, who are exempt from military service. So what do Israelis agree on? This is one thing that there's a consensus around, and it crosses all the political eyes for the most part, other than the ultra-Orthodox themselves. They argue, the argument is that all Haredi or ultra-Orthodox Jews must serve in the IDF. The IDF is missing anywhere between 10 and 20,000 soldiers to maintain its level of operational service. And the fact that there's a whole segment of the society that does not serve, does not participate, does not contribute, has become a kind of a taboo. You gotta do it. No exemption. Moreover, the data shows that people are in favor of personal sanctions, criminal sanctions, and so on and so forth. Israelis agree that political discourse is toxic and volatile and may result in violence, perhaps something that is similar to what we've seen here following the assassination of Charlie Kirk. But perhaps like it is the case here in the United States, it's the other side's fault. It's not my fault. It's not my side's, it's not my ideological camp's fault. It's the other side, which is very interesting. The polarization is very, very robust, very significant. They all agree that the economic future is uncertain. Some are kind of slightly more optimistic, some are less, but certainly there's more financial dire straits ahead. Certainly if the war prolongs and if you need to suffer the impact of boycotts or termination of contracts, as was the case with Spain a couple of weeks ago, the Norwegian Wealth Foundation divested from Israel, and so on and so forth. What do they disagree on for the most part? There's a disagreement still about the judicial reform and overhaul. And this is a function of your political affinity. Whether you're a supporter of Benjamin Netanyahu or the political right in Israel, then you're in favor. You want to go further, faster, bigger, better. And if you're not, you're still arguing that this undermines the democratic basis of the state of Israel. And certainly they disagree about the future prospects of resolving or even managing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Some argue that the management of the conflict or conflict management is no longer an option. You got to solve it. But others take a very, very different approach, saying this is not feasible. There's not going to be a solution. There's no resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You can't negotiate with the Palestinians, certainly based on what they've done on October 7th. This is a done deal. Israelis disagree about the future. Where to go now? Where to go from here? How does the new Israeli social contract looks like? There's a whole lot of conversation about Israel as a Jewish democratic state. Can it be? Can it remain both? What is the right balance between Jewish and democratic? To what extent is it committed to liberal values, Western liberal values, or to what extent is it unique or more Jewish than others would like it to be? So this is something that October 7th did not change or did not alter or did not fix, but to some extent only exacerbated. Alrighty, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to kind of run through some concluding remarks. Again, as I said, long term, we don't know what October 7th means for Israeli politics, society, security, and so on and so forth. But some of the visible short-term effects we can identify quite easily. The Israeli political setting or the system itself remained largely intact. The government has not resigned, has not formed an inquiry commission. It has no intention to stop serving. Benjamin Netanyahu is still the political figure in charge. He is very susceptible to some pressure from inside his cabinet, especially Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. But in reality, and this is a very interesting point that I would like to emphasize, his partners don't have a real interest in dissolving the coalition. They don't have anywhere to go. So nevertheless, this political tug of war impacts domestic and foreign policy, and it's Kissinger who famously said that Israel has no foreign policy on the domestic politics. So when you see Israeli international affairs, diplomatic initiatives, always keep an open mind about the domestic political origins of that. The government efforts to try to advance the judicial reform were paused but resumed in full force. The AG was fired, the challenges to the Supreme Court, the appointment of David Zini earlier today, and so on and so forth. The IDF's failure was unprecedented, also the Shin Bet, the Israeli Security Service, but it was able to recoup some of the lost prestige. Certainly, if you think about Iran, Lebanon, and Syria, it is unable, nevertheless, to defeat Hamas 2 years into the war, despite the fact that there's a new chief of staff who said, I can take care of it. Hamas was degraded, certainly, but the hostages were not released completely. There's still hostages in captivity in the Gaza Strip. It's not clear to what extent you can both destroy Hamas and release the hostages at the same time, simultaneously. And again, the chief of staff raises the flag about the lack of a diplomatic political off-ramp. Israeli society was tentatively united in the aftermath of the attack. People felt closer to one another, but polarization, divisiveness resurfaced quickly thereafter. Political discourse worsened in the last year or so. Some argue that the future of the state of Israel is uncertain. It is unclear, certainly, whether Israel will be the same Israel that we've seen in the past 75 years or so. Others argue this is overblown. It's an alarmist position. It is just people who are dissatisfied, unhappy with the current leadership, but argue that there's nothing wrong with these reforms, that there's nothing that will move kind of the foundations. Nevertheless, I would argue that these debates, and certainly the policies that will result from it, will determine not only the next election, the when and who wins, but also the face of Israel in the decades to come. Thank you so much. I appreciate you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Saltzman. That was a wonderful overview of temperature of the political and military and social situation in Israel today. And as you said many times, it's complex. So we have a few questions. We'll start with Steve Davidson's two-part question. Will we ever know the facts regarding the possible failures to see the numerous warnings and intelligence signals before October 7th that might have prevented the attack on Hamas? And a second part question, as horrible as it sounds, isn't Israel in a better position militarily with the defeats, challenges in Syria, Lebanon, Iran, and Gaza, and the potential political realignment?
So with regards to the first part of the question, or the first question, yes, I think that we will know. I think that we in a way we kind of know now that this is kind of a two-pronged answer. On the one hand, there was a political mindset, a political conception that you can manage the conflict, you can feed the beast, so to speak. It will remain happy, it will remain docile, and everything will be fine. Excuse me. That was an intentional policy by the Netanyahu governments, plural, that is, including Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid in the past. There are about, I saw a report, there's about 150 different inquiry commissions within the IDF. The Israeli office of the ombudsman basically is looking into it as well. People are waiting for a kind of the national or the official inquiry commission, but there's a lot of things that we already know about that. And you're absolutely right. There were a lot of indications. This is not the first time where strategic surprise happens. You can think about Pearl Harbor. You can think about the German Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union as well, in other cases, of course. It seems like this was, again, an element or a fusion of a couple of these components, the kind of the big framework, don't do anything about Gaza, everything is fine, they're deterred, they have no motivation on the one hand. And as a result, the IDF, the military, did not deploy, especially, they didn't pay attention to these indications. In fact, we know that they had some of the plans already as early as a few years back, but they just didn't pay attention. And this is what intelligence often does, like Pearl Harbor again, it just sifts away pieces of knowledge because it doesn't fit the conception, so to speak, like 1973. The second part of the question, yes, absolutely. From a military perspective, from a security perspective, even with the Gaza Strip, for the most part, Israeli national security far better today than before. Absolutely. The attacks in Lebanon, the pager operation, the attacks in Iran, for the most part, improved Israel's prestige, its deterrence. In Iran, it is not clear to what extent was the Israeli strike able to completely eradicate the nuclear program. We know that the bunker busters used by the Americans did not do the job as anticipated, certainly not to the extent it was anticipated. There's 400 kilograms, about 800 pounds of fissile nuclear material that is somewhere traveling between sites or whatever. But for the most part, Israel's national security is better. But I would say this, national security is not just about military success. It's about leveraging that towards diplomatic success. And in that sense, I would argue that Israel has been losing in the past 2 years. And you can see that in the UN General Assembly meetings, the recognition of a Palestinian state, boycotts. The Israeli prime minister had to extend the flight to DC 600 kilometers because he was unwilling to endanger the plane or himself. If he needs to land in an emergency landing in Spain, for example, he would be taken to custody, arrested. And so this is something that is very significant. I think that we don't pay attention or enough attention to that. Not only that, Israel is being Israel's participation in UEFA, or the what you guys call soccer or football, as it should probably be called, will be ejected from that tournament, and so Israeli teams will not be able to compete. The Eurovision, the song contest, I would strongly encourage us to think about the non-military side elements of the past couple of years and where Israel is at now.
On that note, Gary Starr asked, so given this international isolation, is this unusual in war for Israel, and what can be done to overcome being branded as a pariah state?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Absolutely. I think that it's not new. This process or this experience is not new. You can think about a number of other cases, in the past. In 1956, for example, Israel conspired with the French and the British to take over the Sinai, to remove Gamal Abdel Nasser, the president of Egypt. The United States imposed its will. Eisenhower told Ben-Gurion, evacuate from the Gaza Strip, and he did. So Israel was kind of, I would say, isolated as such. You can think about the United States and the international criticism after Israel bombed the Iraqi nuclear site in 1981. But that was, I would argue, it wasn't long lasting. And I fear that this is something completely different. Just like that the attack of October 7th was utterly unprecedented in the scope and the nature, I believe that this isolation, this pariah state situation is going to outlast the conflict itself. I heard somebody say that this is not going to be a light switch where you just turn it on back again after the war had ended, and Israel will be admitted to all these international forums and everything will be fine and we can sing Kumbaya by the fireplace. I am very much concerned. I wrote about that. I'm very concerned about this pariah state and the fact that Israel is being charged of genocide, the use of genocide so freely in that regard, especially of all people. The Jewish state in that regard, I would argue that that speaks volumes to Israel's current status and the way that Israel is now perceived in the international community.
Any suggestions of what to do about that?
First of all, I would say the following. It is not a question of hasbara or foreign policy or diplomacy or PR, if you wish. It is about actions on the ground. It is the fact that footage that comes out from the Gaza Strip shows a completely kind of a moon-like surface, the number of people killed, the maimed individuals, the children, the women, and so on and so forth. This is massive. And I would say the following. We still don't have massive groups of journalists on the ground. So when the war ends and the gates open, so to speak, and journalists will flow into the Gaza Strip, I anticipate even a kind of a worse backlash against Israel. So first of all, it's about changing policy, changing behavior, rather than speaking about it. International humanitarian aid, inclusion of aid agencies of various kinds, as much as you can, just overflow of aid must be completed into the Gaza Strip, and again, striving to finish end this horrible conflict in the Gaza Strip.
Stephen Fickelman asks, says Golda Meir resigned after the failure of security in the Yom Kippur War. Why hasn't Netanyahu not resigned after his failure there?
This is kind of a go-to historical example from Israeli history. I just would like to remind the member of the audience that Golda Meir ran for office again, and they won. They won. It took some time for the ripple effects to impact the political setting. Exactly what I'm saying, what I've been saying in this presentation. She won re-election, still getting the most seats in the Israeli parliament. But once the inquiry commission kind of started working, the Agranat Commission started working on that and issued the first kind of the interim report blaming the military leadership first and foremost, but mentioning Golda Meir as well. So this in combination with her own personal guilt about those people who died eventually led to her resignation, as well as Moshe Dayan. But we're talking about, I would argue that we're talking about different people in different times, and their conception of accountability or responsibility is completely different than this government or this prime minister. She was not indicted for corruption. She had no political interest in staying in power just for the sake of staying in power or avoiding jail time, if you wish. In this sense, she was still, I would argue, thinking about the state of Israel. What is the national interest? And she decided it is better off for her to resign, given the pain, given the price, and given the criticism, the public criticism. It would be unsensible of her to remain in office. It's not what we see now.
Calvin Blinder asks, is there a viable movement for Israel-Palestinian reconciliation in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza? How strong or weak, and who are its leaders?
So the short answer is that the Israeli left, that was pro-peace or pro-Palestinian state, is virtually non-existent. It's a long process. We don't have the time to go through the different phases, but the bottom line is that the Israeli left has nearly perished from the face of the political map for the most part. And you can see that in the number of seats that Labor has, or the Avodah party has, the fact that most politicians would not call themselves, other than just there's one Israeli Zionist leader, Yair Golan, who's not in the parliament but running for office, and says that um, um, quite unequivocally that he's pro-peace, pro-Palestinian state. He has some issues now with recognition now, but certainly he's not your usual or your normal center-right politician. There was a peace summit a few months ago, I think earlier this year, in Jerusalem, in a conference hall. There are organizations that are working on the ground, certainly on the Israeli side, but there are some on the Palestinian side as well. There's some people here in the United States who are arguing and advocating for a change in the Palestinian leadership, certainly the removal of Hamas, disarming them, and certainly anticipating some change once that happens. But to be honest, it's a very small group of people or organizations for the most part. Again, Israelis are still under trauma. They have no capacity to express empathy for the most part. They don't see, for the most part, the images. It was very difficult to show these images on Israeli television for a long time. It was just a couple of months ago when it all started, when the conversation about starvation and hunger started. Then they started seeing, Israeli viewers started seeing that. So the Israeli left is on life support. Hopefully, it's not going to perish in the near future.
Israel is a democracy, and just as in America, there are so many factions. Do you feel that the polarization that you spoke about,
Yes.
how worried are you? Is this on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of a democracy, in terms of what you expect in a democracy? How worried are you? You intimated that, well, the future of Israel is on the line. Are you really worried about the future of Israel?
I am worried. I wrote an article with a colleague of mine from the UK last year, published by Foreign Affairs, and I'm very concerned in the sense that I don't think that Israel will cease to exist as a state actor. The institutions will be there, Israelis will be there. They'll have their passports and so on and so forth. What we were trying to warn, or to try to kind of draw attention to, is the fact that Israel may not be the same Israel, as I said during my presentation, that the commitment to liberal values, this idea of democracy, the idea that you can stay a Jewish state, but at the same time accommodate non-Jews within the state of Israel, that account for about 25% or so. And it manifests itself in a number of ways. One, from a political perspective, kind of the branches of government, the lack of separation, the lack of checks and balances that allow the executive, the government, the prime minister. And again, not a lot of people know, for example, Israel is a parliamentary system. So the prime minister of Israel is not only the head of the executive, but is also a member of the legislature. So think about that. Trump is both the president and the Speaker of the House, or the Speaker of the Senate, for that matter. So that has a lot of power that is entrusted with that figure. And so it's quite, I don't want to say easy, but it's relatively possible for the prime minister, if they want to amass a whole lot of power and authority and do pretty much whatever they want. And again, case in point now, the new head of the Shin Bet that was approved by a commission earlier today, the Grunis Commission, he's based on what we know about himself, his upbringing, his socialization, his political views, his religious views, and so on and so forth. This is a very radical individual. And there are claims, for example, that when he was interviewed by the prime minister in the back of his car for a couple of minutes, then Benjamin Netanyahu asked him, "Are you going to be loyal to me or to the state," or something to that effect? And he responded in the affirmative about the former rather than the latter. So that adds another layer of missing gatekeepers. The Israeli Shin Bet is a very powerful organization. trying to sack, to fire, to remove the AG, the Israeli Attorney General, undercuts some of the elements of Israeli democracy. The public sphere, we will see it next week or in 10 days or so during Yom Kippur. To what extent is the public sphere um, succumbing, if you like, to very particular views about synagogue and state relations? There's a city in Israel, Lod. The mayor decided that nobody can use um, an electric scooter. They can't use anything else because it's Yom Kippur and you need to respect the Jewish day of mourning. The problem is that Lod has a very significant, sizable population that is not Jewish. So how do you deal with that, with these tensions, embedded tensions? And I'm very concerned that Israel is foregoing the democratic values in favor of the Jewish and kind of leaves everything else as a fig leaf, if you like, at the end of the day. I'm very concerned about that.
Okay, we have just a few minutes left. I do want to congratulate you on one statement by Debbie Firestone, who said, "No question, just wanted to say how grateful I am for this painfully honest and balanced explanation of an extraordinary complex situation that most people here in North America, for the most part, see in a black and white."
Yeah, yeah. And again, Audrey, you and I have this conversation, if I may kind of quote us both, so I feel free. It's some of the problems here in the United States is the lack of nuance, the lack of knowledge-based and nuanced conversation. This is something that we try to do at the University of Maryland with the Gilhorn Institute and our program. I'm going to plug in just one event because it's very pertinent with your permission, Audrey. Next week on the 30th of September, we have Tal Schneider, who's a senior journalist for the Times of Israel, who is now accompanying the prime minister in his trip to the GA, and she will give a talk about Israeli politics in 2025 and the prospects for the future. She has insider information. She knows everything and everybody. So you can follow or get some more information on www.israelstudies.umd.edu. And I apologize for taking advantage of this
That's
stage for that
fine. Will
purpose.
that be a live lecture or
This is a webinar, so you can
a
join in from
webinar?
wherever you want. Yes, it's going to
Ah,
be Tuesday, September 30th, 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time.
okay. We'll put that in our follow-up
Oh,
email.
that's very
And
kind of you.
that
I
would be
appreciate
great.
that. And I appreciate
Right.
the comment or the compliment from the
Yes.
viewer. I appreciate that very much.
That's good. So we have just in 1 minute, anything
Okay.
that you want to leave us with?
Now, I teach classes on Israeli politics and society, Israeli foreign and security policy, US foreign policy, political psychology, and so on and so forth. And I always tell my students, if you forget everything you've learned throughout the semester, just remember one word: complicated. And this is not me trying to be evasive. And I said that in other forums over the years multiple times. It's not me trying to be evasive or trying to avoid confronting these ugly facts and so on and so forth. But it's just to say that you can look at these events from multiple perspectives. There's a Palestinian perspective. There's Palestinian plight in the Gaza Strip. There's Palestinian suffering. There's Israeli suffering still 2 years after October 23. Still there, families, hostages, dead people who are still held in the Gaza Strip somewhere, soldiers who died. There was an Israeli officer who was killed just a day ago. An Israeli soldier died today. These are very, very difficult times. So my takeaway is, or the last minute, the last word is, try to stay optimistic, educate yourself, study, follow the news, ask questions, reach out to me. I'm more than happy to communicate with the viewers, with those who participated here and other talks always. And please attend our events. They're extremely, I would argue, they're extremely diverse, provide multiple perspectives of the topics of the day.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Saltzman. Our next Scholars Circle features Dr. Marcy Braverman Goldstein on Scholars United, Strategies and Actions to Combat Anti-Semitism in Schools. On October the 23rd, it's a Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. That's Thursday, October 23rd, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We will put your Zoom lecture on our notes to all of you who have attended, and thank you all for attending this lecture tonight and for your support of Scholar Circle. We try to educate, that's what we're trying to do, and Dr. Saltzman, you are amazing and terrific, and thank you so
That
much
is
for your
way
lecture.
too kind. שנה טובה, גמר חתימה טובה, חג שמח, all the best. רק בשורות טובות, they say in Hebrew. Only good news, hopefully, soon.
Thank you all. We'll see you soon.
Take care, folks.